We fought, we won, let's eat. That, as we know, is the typical of all Jewish holidays, in particular Hanukkah. It's interesting that Hanukkah always always coincides with the two parshiot of Vayeishev and Miketz. Vayeishev and Miketz is the story of Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. We know the story. Joseph, he's loved by his father. His brothers sell him into slavery. They're jealous. And he goes into Egypt. He ends up having an altercation with the wife of Potiphar, goes into jail. Long story short, he becomes the viceroy and he helps his brothers come down to Egypt from famine. Yeah, interesting why that happens. Why is it that it always coincides with Hanukkah? Secondly, a famous question is asked in the story of Hanukkah, and that is, why did the Jewish people, if they only had one jug of oil, the Kohanim in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple, why did they not thin out the wicks so that the oil would have lasted for 8 days? True, it would not have produced as good of a flame, it wouldn't have looked as nice, but the lights would have lit for all 8 days. Why did we not thin out the wicks? That's a famous question that is asked on the story of Hanukkah. As we know, the Greek war, the war against the Greeks, took place against the Syrian Greeks. Alexander the Great had died, the kingdom split into 4, and the Syrian Greeks were the ones that went against the Jewish people. And they made decrees against the Jewish people. They made a decree of not learning Torah and not performing mitzvot. In particular, 3 mitzvot: Rosh Chodesh, the sanctification of the new moon; Shabbat; and Brit Milah, circumcision. And so the Jews did what they thought was the right thing to do. They hid out in caves. And as we know, when the Greeks came to look at them and to check on them, the Jewish people pretended not to be learning Torah, doing mitzvot, and playing dreidel. Yeah, so they were gambling, it seems like. They showed the Greeks that they were gambling. So because of that, the Jewish people kept living lives like that. The question is, well, what possessed the Jewish people to enter the war? If that's the case, why did they want to enter the war? So the answer, says the Medrash, and there are many answers to this. One of the answers is, says the Medrash, that they took a page out of the book of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Who are Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah? So during the Babylonian exile of the Jewish people, the evil Nebuchadnezzar started idolatry. He brought idolatry into the temple, into the entire Jewish lives. And many Jews chose to die and not serve idolatry. And other Jews just escaped. This is the story of Daniel in the lion's den. But there are 3 Jews, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They could have run away. And they went to Ezekiel, the prophet, Yechezkel, and they said, what should we do? He said, you could run away, it's fine. And they looked at him and said, what if we're willing to die to show the Jewish people in the world that we're willing to die for our Judaism, for the Torah and the mitzvot, to serve God, to sanctify God? Are we allowed to? And they said yes. And so they did. So the Maccabees, the Hashmonaim, the Jewish people at the time living under the Greek, they were actually living in Israel, but hiding from the Greeks. Yeah, they said to themselves, if Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah did this, we could do this also. And they said, you know what? We're not expecting to win the war. We're weak. We've been hiding in caves. We're not really able to fight, but we need to show the world of what we stand for. And what we want to stand for is that Judaism, our Judaism, and the way that we learn Torah and we do mitzvot matters so much that we're willing to fight for it. And so what did they do? They went and fought. And it was a crazy war, weak people against the mightiest army in the world. And what happened? As we know, one battle took place, miraculously they won. The next battle took place, miraculously they won. And so on and so forth. It was a complete miracle. Yeah? And so what did they do? The first thing they did after war is they went into the Beit HaMikdash, into the temple, and they lit the menorah, the holy menorah. That one of the mitzvot that we have is to light the menorah in the Beit HaMikdash. And they saw one jug of oil that was pure oil that hadn't been contaminated. And they could have thinned out the wicks. But they said, you know what? We entered a war when we didn't have to. We lived a life way above of what we had to do. And Hashem blessed us. Let's do this mitzvah in the best way possible also. And Hashem will bless us. And so they did. They wanted the best flame. They wanted to do the mitzvah in the Beit HaMikdash of lighting the candles in the best way possible. And as we know, God blessed them and made a miracle that candle lit for 8 days when it should have only lit for 1 day. What a miracle. And that's to teach us in life, how do we want to be as Jewish people? How do we want to do our mitzvot? How do we want to live our lives? The Maccabees tell us exactly how we're supposed to live our lives. When we learn Torah and we do mitzvot, we want to go above and beyond ourselves. We want to live spiritual lives, lives connected to Judaism, lives connected as Jews in the best way possible. And it's very interesting that this holiday always coincides with the story of Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Why is that? Well, one thing about Joseph was he was a dreamer. He always dreamed. And through all the trials and tribulations that he went through, the ups and the downs, he always stayed connected and he never gave up on his dream. And it came through at the end. It took many, many years, but his dream came true. And so the message for this Hanukkah is twofold. Number one, we have